Welcome to the Aerospace Advantage podcast, brought to you by PenFed. I'm your host, Heather Lucky Penny. Here on the Aerospace Advantage, we speak with leaders in the DoD, industry, and other subject matter experts to explore the intersection of strategy, operational concepts, technology, and policy when it comes to air and space power. So this week, we're going to talk about what it will take to project air power into the heart of the fight in a conflict with China. Most of the time, we think about enemy fighter planes, surface-to-air missiles, and AAA, but the biggest challenge might actually come down to the electromagnetic spectrum operations. China has long studied U.S. warfighting constructs. They got smart from Desert Storm, right? Their eyes were watered by the overwhelming U.S. air power capability that utterly paralyzed the Iraqi regime. So they went to school. And they've studied us from Desert Storm to our current missions. They know that our forces are highly reliant on battle networks, those networked operations. And as we move into long-range kill chains, they see more surface attack area. So whether thinking about command and control, teaming mission assets real-time, or taking advantage of connectivity to space, the American way of war, especially air power, requires a lot of connectivity. And so China has focused a tremendous amount of energy to harness various means to degrade and deny our communication. I mean, you've heard Dahm say it before, countering Link 16 is basically a cottage industry in China. So whether we're talking about electronic warfare, cyber, or any other means, China has made this a centerpiece of their warfighting strategy, systems destruction, by destroying our links, degrading our connectivity, isolating specific nodes. They can degrade the way we go to war to a point where we, like the Iraqis, become paralyzed. So that has huge implications for our forces, and it's exactly what Dahm has investigated in the latest report, Disconnected by Design, 5th and 6th generation aircraft in disaggregated collaborative air operations. So we're here to learn more. Dahm, welcome. It's always fabulous to have you with us.
Great to be back, Heather.
Okay, and also joining us today is Colonel Russ Big Badowski, a longtime F-22 pilot who's currently serving as a professor at the Eisenhower School for National Security and Resource Strategy, which is also part of the National Defense University here in D.C. Big, you've worked with us before, and it's great to have you here on the podcast.
Yeah, I'm excited to be a part of it. You guys do a fantastic job of looking at the future of air power, and I'm excited to discuss this unique and future-looking capability that Dahm studied.
Okay, so Dahm, I tried to lay out the problem statement in the opener, but clearly you're the expert. I mean, you understand China's strategy. Dig deeper into the details for us.
Yeah, so we're talking about, again, you said it in the intro, right? The PLA strategy is fundamentally about degrading, disrupting, and denying those communications, those links, those battle networks to U.S. and allied forces. China has this informationized warfare strategy. We've talked about it here on the show before, and it's specifically designed to counter the U.S. networked approach that you were talking about. The PLA, the People's Liberation Army, is going to launch overwhelming attacks against U.S. military information links and nodes to cut off and isolate U.S. air power force packages from those battle networks, and then pick off the disconnected elements at a time and place of their choosing. So the PLA warfighting strategy, I might have talked about it on the podcast before, but it's really a two-step process. Very simple, very straightforward. Disaggregate the enemy force, that's us, by attacking the C4ISR system of systems, and then strike the isolated and disconnected enemy force with long-range precision fires, right? Step one, step two. We focus a lot on step two. How do I survive the missile attack? How do I
protect the nodes, protect the aircraft?
Yeah, how do I defeat the weapon, right? What kind of defenses can I array? Those types of things. We give less attention, I think, to step one, which is fundamental. We think like, oh yeah, and I need comm. Right,
JADC2, right?
Yeah, like it's an afterthought, right?
It sounds eerily familiar, like divide and conquer.
Right, and this is the thing, right? They got this from us. This is not a uniquely Chinese approach to warfare. We have spent decades, making our enemy, rendering our enemies deaf, dumb, and blind, and then picking them off. Like that's how we establish air power, right? We make them deaf, dumb, and blind, and we just fly in there and we start plinking them with weapons. So rendering this information dominance strategy, rendering their adversaries deaf, dumb, and blind, is central to the Chinese concept. So what disaggregated collaborative air operations, or DCAO, is is an operational concept that really sidesteps that fundamental PLA strategy by employing air forces that are disconnected. The concept relies on a force of fifth or next generation aircraft that can operate independently in smaller formations at the tactical edge of the battle space. Fifth generation aircraft can penetrate the enemy air defenses, they can sense, they can coordinate, and they can execute operations without those needs, without the reliance, the dependency, I guess, on those battle networks and that reach back.
Okay, so, it's funny. I often tease General Deptula, like, thanks, Bosch. You're the one who inspired China on this, divide and conquer strategy, systems destruction, right? And so, China's been good. They have gone to school. They are excellent students, but we're not learning our own lessons. So what inspired your approach to DCAO?
Well, we do have a tradition here on Aerospace Nation of blaming the Army, so we could start with that. They're an easy target, but I think the Air Force in a lot of ways needs to own up to buying into a lot of Army ideas that have been folded into the joint warfighting concept. Now, I'm not saying that the joint warfighting concept doesn't have merit, but it's pretty clear the Army's fingerprints are all over it. They talk about expanded maneuver and pulsed operations. This idea of bringing the force together in space and time, or at least conceptually to deliver effects in a synchronized manner. And that's all well and good. At the end of the day, the joint warfighting concept relies a lot on mass, whether it's virtual mass, where you have these synchronized operations, or whether it's pulsed air operations where aircraft are coming from lots of different locations to arrive at a time and a place to focus power. But my contention is that modern air power doesn't necessarily have to rely on mass. Not the way the ground forces think about mass, or maybe even the Navy thinks about mass. The Air Force's thinking on how to achieve air superiority in the future of air power, it almost seems to be retrograding to a pre-1980s or earlier concept that focuses once again on attrition warfare and massed effects. So I looked back in this concept at proven operational concepts to counter what we're seeing in terms of these more and more advanced threats. So disaggregated collaborative air operations is a concept that's based on an evolution of proven concepts like effects-based operations and parallel warfare.
Now, before you go on, I want to make clear, when you say we don't need to really rely on mass, because you're looking at mass from an attrition-based force-on-force type of fight. It doesn't mean that we don't need capacity, because when you take a look at the Pacific fight, and frankly, what we'll need to do across the entire globe in terms of national security interests, we need to have numbers. But how we employ is different. So I think it's an important distinction. Mass, the way you're using it, does not equal the argument that we consistently have that we need capacity, that we need lots of air force.
That's what I would say. Mass and capacity are two different things, right? The Army is big, but they need to bring mass to the battlefield. They need to focus that capacity in a specific time and place, right? They need to focus artillery fires. They need to focus troop concentrations and things like that.
It's also on a specific target as well, right?
Or a specific front.
A specific target or specific front, as opposed to reaching in via parallel, the way that air power can drive mass at different points in the enemy's center of gravity, the different system of systems that the enemy's doing.
If you talk with Gonzo, he talks about fighting from the inside out, and what he means by that is penetrating deep into the adversary's heartland or wherever their key centers of gravity are, and being able to achieve effects and deny sanctuary that way, which is different than what you're talking about.
Yeah, right back to World War I. I mean, we're just going to fly over the front line and we're going to deliver effects behind the front line.
True.
It's almost like special forces, but on a much larger scale, where we can get past the enemy front line. We can deliver effects at very specific places across the front, behind the front, deep into enemy territory, whatever. But we've bought into this idea of
force on force.
We've bought into this idea of force on force, and we've kind of retrograded to this idea that we're in that attrition warfare game. And so I looked back at the concepts like EBO, right? Neutralizing an adversary's ability to function effectively by targeting critical subsystems within a broader network. Parallel warfare is sort of the same thing. Parallel warfare really informs the targeting, whereas effects-based operation is the operational approach, right?
The weaponeering,
I'm targeting key critical elements that may be on the forward edge of the battle space or may be well behind the forward edge of the battle space, but I'm delivering outsized effects
to make them deaf, dumb, and blind.
To make them deaf, dumb, and blind, right? So again, the problem is that the way we have pursued things like effects-based operations in the past, it relies on, or it has relied on, highly centralized advanced planning and operational synchronization, right? You've got to get like all these parts of this force package, all the supporting elements of this, even if you talk about pulsed air power, like all the different pieces and parts of that pulse taking off from different bases, and I got to coordinate my tanker support, and I got to do all the things, right? So even if I'm on the ground just planning this, I need connectivity. And how does that work in the ACE concept where it's like, well, we'll have terrestrial comms, and it's like, you don't think they're going to cut fiber optic cables? Like,
we'll have space comms.
We'll have space comms. Well, those are going to be interrupted too, and you're moving around because you're trying not to, you're trying not to get shot. So, how do we get past this need for
perfect planning and perfect execution
and synchronization, either on the ground or in the air, where we can do this disaggregated collaborative air operation construct?
So we're going to dig more into this disaggregated collaborative construct. But Big, you and I grew up flying fighters in a world where we weren't disaggregated. We had 100% connectivity. I couldn't even imagine having to try and fight through jamming, right? So talk to me about the assumptions that created that dependency in our ConOps.
Yeah, as I was thinking through this, it's funny. You say we grew up in a place where there was 100% connectivity, and I think that's true. But to a large extent, this disaggregation is kind of what's old is new coming back again.
It's kind of Cold War-ish, right?
As
Alone and unafraid of bad guy land.
Well, as a young F-15 B course student back at Tyndall, there was a purposeful decision to not use Link 16, to operate without command and control. You were essentially a welded wingman to your flight lead who was out there and kind of directed everything that you were doing. All you needed to do was keep eyes on him, sort your threat, and shoot on time, and then notch or go out if required, and tell lead if he was on fire or not. That was about it. Now, as you progress and you get to your operational unit, you started to use Link 16 and see how dependent we were on that picture. That was beyond what the F-15, which is an amazing radar, but beyond the F-15 radar could show you. You could now see behind you. You could see a little bit further away based on what was being pumped in through your link. You advance that to the F-22 now, and I transition over, and we've got iFiddle, this network that provides massive data translation between the formation to give you, again, an even more robust targetable picture. So I see this where I started off as a young wingman where we were not in this assured communication area. And in fact, we were practicing and training young wingmen to operate
be able to
that
operate
way.
Without that kind of connectivity.
Fast forward the last 23 years, and now you've got Bacon that's out there translating networks between F-22s and F-35s and fourth generation. You have the F-22s and F-35s that are operating in these disaggregated formations that are no longer welded wingmen. We are training our wingmen from the get-go to operate 5, 10, 20 miles apart from their flight lead.
But dependent on that connectivity.
Continuing to be dependent on that connectivity. But it's funny, so we talk about this. It's not just that the U.S. Air Force has grown up and has now started to have this dependency on connectivity. It's a social phenomenon, right? You look at you've got your Wi-Fi code right here so that I can make sure that I'm connected while I'm doing this podcast. It is a global expectation that connectivity will occur and that we'll have the ability to reach back.
But let's also be honest. I mean, that kind of connectivity improved our combat operations because you could then see the sort that your wingman had. You knew where he was in formation. You were able to see behind you. So there's a lot of operational benefits that we got from that connectivity. And as well as when you go up higher in the echelon to command and control, the 1,000-mile screwdriver to make sure that they were looking at whatever your targeting pod was seeing and letting you know whether or not you had permission to drop. So there's been pros and cons, pluses and minuses. but overall it's made us more effective.
I think for the most part, it's mostly positives when you think about what this has enabled us to do.
Yeah.
From a risk reduction perspective, from a who's making the decisions, where the decisions are being made. Now, you can argue centralized control versus
Centralized execution.
Yeah. So we can talk about that if you want to, but I think there's huge benefits to what we've accrued to this. It just has created some very massive dependencies
and vulnerabilities.
And it's those dependencies and vulnerabilities that Chinese strategy is designed to go after. They're not morons, right? Like they've been watching how effective and how efficient it has made our force.
Yeah, we've been able to do more with less
and they're
because of data links.
We should probably attack that connectivity, that data feed, that we should corrupt the data, we should deceive them, we should do all these things. That is essentially what they're doing. And so if we're going to keep fighting wars in Southwest Asia, if we're going to keep fighting wars in benign electromagnetic environments, let's do the most efficient, cost-effective, collaborative,
brittle
thing that we can do, but it's brittle.
It's brittle.
Right?
That's what I keep. Supply chains, defense industrial base, our connectivity. That is a brittle weakness.
So big. I'd highlight your experience as Raptor driver, and you bring up the brittleness because I want you to talk about that. Because being a Raptor guy, F-22 is not your whole story. Because you also served a tour with MC-12s in Afghanistan. And that's a mission where you saw tons of teaming and your crew provided significant volume of real-time ISR support. So we're talking about the value that these battle networks and the data links can provide to ground forces at the tactical level, to also, you were focused on the ground support, but we've seen how that provides a value, the data links and all of that, to create more efficient and effective and rapid response from the air side. What were the pros and cons of that approach?
Yeah. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the MC-12, 7 radios, SIPR and JWICS connectivity where you're chatting with different chat rooms, satellite internet connectivity, camera footage that was high resolution that could be offboarded to real time to people on the ground or in the AOC, line of sight radios, beyond line of sight radios, massive connectivity. It was a hub that enabled this. You could talk to the AOC while you're talking to other airframes that are in the stack, while you're talking to the ground force that's kicking indoors, while you're talking to the TOC where the ground force came from that has their boss, while you're talking to the folks back in DC for national tactical level integration type stuff. All of that's going on real time.
In your airplane.
In the airplane. And you had very young, very inexperienced. The training that they gave the 4 of us that were on the crew of that airplane was 3 weeks.
Okay, that's astonishing. Why was it so short?
Because there was so much oversight. If someone moved the camera ball off the target on what they were looking for, someone from the TOC would immediately pipe in and say, move it back. Someone from the AOC would say, hey, I need you to communicate with the EA-18s that are coming in to make sure they have the coordinates on where they need to be laying down support. You could talk to the people in DC about the type of national tactical integration that they're doing with national assets to queue satellites, to queue other capabilities. It was amazing, but it meant that we on the plane were kind of just out there doing what we were told in a lot of respects. We didn't have a lot of decision space. We didn't have a lot of ways to execute on our own. There was a lot of different folks that were treating us like we were that young F-15 wingman. We were just there doing our job, telling lead if he was on fire.
Staying visual, flying good formation, shooting our sort.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they were able to accept that risk and the limited training that they provided us because of the connectivity.
Yeah.
It really was an amazing capability, but it also allowed us to buy down risk in ways that you wouldn't expect.
I think what's really relevant about your story is the connectivity piece, the connectivity that bought down risk with inexperienced aircrew, but the utter dependence on the connectivity that was very brittle. So, JDM, we didn't design our ConOps to be like this back in the olden days of the Cold War. I mean, as I remember it, folks took off with a given set of tasks. You kissed a fighter pilot on the lips after you gave him his ROE, his spins, and his target set, and all right, go off and be successful. And you had trust in that formation that they would go do what they needed to do with it, the commander's intent, and come back, mission successful, or at least within the bounds of the left and rights that we gave them. And things were even more stark for stealth aircraft like the F-117 and the B-2, where they literally turned off their comms to avoid emitting because, that would compromise their position, maybe be a big old "here I am" type beacon. The disadvantage of this is that it made for pretty rigid war plans because you had to be very specific about what they were going to do. They couldn't flex. And that's why the data link on the F-22 was really amazing. In addition with their other sensors in the Fusion, it turned this sort of stealth as a defensive capability into something that gave them initiative, maneuver, and surprise and offensive capability. But the good thing was that the force back then was resilient from this delegated C2 perspectives. I mean, how do we merge the best of both worlds in DCAO?
Yeah, and that's really what DCAO is trying to do, right? Disaggregated collaborative air operations is really trying to get the best of both worlds, given this sort of back to the future reality that we're facing. Informationized warfare, the Chinese PLA strategy of informationized warfare and this idea of having information dominance and breaking key U.S. links and nodes is essentially an evolution of Soviet radio-electronic combat. And toward the end of the Cold War, there was a realization within the Air Force, within the Joint Force, that radio-electronic combat and Soviet electronic warfare capabilities were super, super bad. And we were not going to be able to communicate with our forces like you said. You maybe you kiss them on the lips. I don't kiss them on the lips, but you pat them on the back, you send them on their way, and it's like whether you're in the Navy and you've got mission orders, or whether you're in the Air Force and you fly out there, comms dark, or with no expectation that you will have comms, and good luck executing your mission. So the requirements for the F-22, the requirements for the F-35, we need to remember those were born out of the latter years of the Cold War.
Yeah, really the F-22 was. The F-35 comes a little bit later, so it's got some different concepts, but the design is during the 1990s.
Right, but the idea is you need an aircraft that can penetrate adversary air defenses, that it can operate largely independently if necessary. And so, we are in this back to the future moment where the operating environments, the challenges that we're facing vis-a-vis the People's Republic of China, even given the changes in technology, are sort of not more than, they are analogous to what we were facing in the latter days of the Cold War in Western Europe. But, this type of ubiquitous data exchange where we have anytime, anywhere connectivity, what you were just talking about in Southwest Asia, it's simply not going to exist against a capable adversary like the modern Russian force, like the People's Liberation Army. And so that's why we're trying to, what can we do? We can't just operate in the dark and feel around and hope that we get it right. We need to come up with a construct of operating in a disaggregated way, but still locally collaborative, where we can deliver those effects against key links and nodes in the enemy force, so we can maximize our use of air power.
Manage your money on your time with 24/7 digital banking on the PenFed mobile app. Easily make payments, transfer funds, and deposit checks through mobile deposit.
That's music to my ears.
Learn more at penfed.org. Federally insured by NCOA.
I really like how you articulated that, because it does put the rules of physics in our favor, right? I mean, like, these long-range data links need to have so much power and so much reach. It really creates a lot of vulnerabilities in a lot of places where you can do that kind of interruption. But when you're in sort of a visual line of sight, the laws of physics help you out in terms of remaining connected. So I think there's a lot of value there in this local battle network that's working together in the DCAO. Now, F-22 was conceived at the tail end of the Cold War. We just talked about that. And much of its design was highly organic. I mean, like, this is an organic kill chain in terms of its information architecture. The sensors, the processing power, the ability to close kill chains was all on board the jet, and had the ability to receive Link 16, but it didn't transmit. And you did have, as you mentioned, iFiddle. So that was data links within the F-22 formation that was low probability of detect and low probability of intercept. But those were not essential to closing kill chains. Run us through that construct and the value of organic kill chains in this kind of EMSO contested environment.
Well, yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. The F-22 systems allow it to operate within the formation disconnected. It is designed to be able to operate in a disconnected mindset. And oftentimes you find it's somewhat funny, but you go to red flags and you talk to the other blue forces and they never know where the F-22s are or what the F-22s are doing. And it's frustrating to a certain extent because it makes it challenging to work together. There are oftentimes, early on especially, where F-22s would get killed by blue air. There would be frats out there because they were not in the net. They were not connected. Now, it also was good because they could go and do things that other airframes could not, but it caused challenges. The LPI, LPD that you talked about, low probability interception and detect on their networks, are good and they're great in the close-in environments. But as you start disaggregating too much, the low power settings mean that
you're going to lose connectivity.
You lose data, you lose bandwidth, you lose throughput. I want to come back to an issue that, J-Dem, when you were talking kind of the back to the future piece, there is a piece that came about with the connectivity and with our wars, global war on terrorism over the last 20 years, that is too good for bosses to care about, for the AOC commander, for the JTF commander, whatever you want to talk about. And that's dynamic targeting, right? So you talked about the F-117 and the B-2s going out and operating, but knowing what their targets were going to be.
Yeah,
They weren't
fixed
flexible.
targets.
There were maybe on a list of a few things where they could, if this isn't there, then go to that, kind of a rollback.
You'd roll back. You'd have a target priority list that would allow you to manage moving targets, but you weren't getting pop-ups.
And that's where I think this concept of dynamic targeting and real-time decision-making on expecting a formation or an F-117 or a B-2 or formation of F-22s or F-47s for that matter to be out there operating and then see, oh, this is a bigger node. This is a more important node that all of a sudden I see. No one else sees it. I can't go ask Mother May I. Godfather's not going to weigh in and say, hey, Godfather directs, go get this thing. That is a challenge that I don't know that we'll be able to pull ourselves away from the need and the necessity to be dynamic. But now, without the connectivity, how do we implement that? How do we train people to understand that dynamism and to give them the authority to be that dynamic?
And so I was going to talk about this a little bit later, but I'll just jump on it now.
Please do.
It's this idea that even if you cannot have two-way communications, again, it's the physics. You can broadcast a lot of stuff into the battle space. You can piggyback on something like a video signal, a TV broadcast signal or something like that. You can broadcast a tremendous amount of data into the battle space. What you're probably going to have to give up on is this idea that you can drive the F-22 around like I'm the 4-star, I've got the stick, do this, do that, right? You can broadcast in and say, hey, look, there's a big node right over there. Maybe the ISR hasn't made it back. But as targets come up, as you get forces flowing back out of the battle space that then offboard the information that they've collected, you can broadcast things in and say target coordinates, weapon selection, things like that. Now, you might have to have an artificial intelligence helper, somebody to sort that broadcast and say, we're pretty sure you're the closest section of aircraft to this. The AI has calculated how this could go, but it is going to have to be more hands-off than the 4-star watching Predator porn with the JAG over his shoulder saying, this is a good target, sir, let's pull the trigger on it. And then the fighters are just the missile trucks.
But let's be honest here. I mean, like if we're talking about a pure conflict, we're probably not saturating the battle space with F-47s and B-21s, right? There's going to be a limited amount there. And as you go into the battle space, you will have a target list, and some of them will be static targets that are key to whatever the strategic campaign plan is. Some of them might be mobile targets, and some of them might end up being dynamic targets. When I say dynamic targets, I'm not saying that they're fast movers. I'm just saying they might be pop-ups, but you know that that's a high priority target. So when it comes down to it, it's really about, do we trust and are we willing to take the risk to give our air crews the authority to buy their bombs and the judgment? Have we given them the training, the reps and sets so that they are ready and confident to buy their own bombs when they're going after targets? Now, so I was a nighttime scud hunter in Iraq in 2003. We're kicking down the door, right? And they were considered such essential targets to prevent broader conflagration that we went through a tremendous amount of rigorous training for visual identification. We integrated with special operations forces, and we were given the authority to buy our own bombs because had such a small window of vulnerability that you had to get them when you saw them. You did not have time to go back and ask Mother May I. And so I think that we're going to those kinds of operations now where you don't necessarily have to wait for higher headquarters to say, hey, here's the targets. It's great to get those kinds of updates because it can help you make you more effective. But I would think that we would also need to be able to delegate that decision authority down to the formations.
And I think you're right. You absolutely have to be able to do that. But again, that's one of those brittle dependencies. Even if you're giving a wingman in an F-47 the opportunity to make a decision that he can direct his CCA to drop a bomb on some critical comm node that pops up. The Chinese also, from a deterrence perspective, they co-locate their strategic comms with their tactical comms.
They're going to make the really important targets commingled with their baby milk factories, right?
and it's crazy to think that a 24-year-old wingman can be out there, and all of a sudden there's a comm node that pops up that we get some ELINT on or something, and he's like, okay, CCA, send it, without any other direction. And I like the idea of the broadcast in, but if you take this CDAO concept, DCAO concept further, it gets to that point where there's not enough time. The temporal pace that is occurring in this fight is so quick that if the systems on a B-21 or an F-47 see this stuff, they're going to want to attack immediately. And the authorities and the risk that is associated with that is very high.
Sure. And no doubt. And we were talking about this before we started recording the podcast, that this is an operational concept. Here is an idea about how to operate to counter the known Chinese strategy for destroying links and nodes and communications pathways and battle networks. It is an operational concept, a point of departure from which we need to then sort through, like, are our people well trained enough? Do we have the right ROE? Is there a technology solution that can address one problem that this brings up? But fundamentally, I'm trying to move the needle away from the sort of massed effect pulsed air power that rely heavily on all of that advanced planning, all of that connectivity, to something that can create real operational dilemmas for the People's Liberation Army, where maybe we didn't hit the perfect target, but we're just coming at them from all different angles all the time. Death by a thousand cuts. It would be great if we could develop those efficiencies and have this really small elite force that goes in there and delivers the decisive blow with 10 weapons. Probably not going to happen. We want to put China in the position where they have to defend all of China all at once, and we're coming at them with 30, 40, 50, 80 sections of aircraft, all with CCAs in tow all at once, and they can't see us coming, and we're not communicating, and we're not giving them the benefit of being able to geolocate and target us. So that's the idea.
I really like how you articulated that, Dahm, because this hybrid approach that disaggregated collaborative air operations is really takes the advantage of those long-range kill chains and data links to try to pipe in information, as well as you mentioned, as you're departing, send off battlespace situational awareness, but really teaming geographically disaggregated forces for a teamed effect. It can be really powerful. So, Dahm, what we're talking about here, what in terms of presenting dilemmas to the PLA is this hybrid approach. I mean, long-range kill chains have some major advantages because you can then team geographically disaggregated, so team the entire force, and that can be really powerful, as you mentioned, effective and efficient, but we shouldn't build a force that demands that connectivity. So where do organic kill chains fit into this? And talk to us more about how you've conceptualized what a mission in the life of one of these DCAO elements might be.
Yeah, so I do want to circle back to what Big was saying before, that it's not that there shouldn't be a demand signal for better connectivity, and there shouldn't be a demand signal for being able to conduct synchronized operations in space and time with oversight that can capitalize on strategic ISR and other things. There are some real advantages of being able to fly, a remotely piloted aircraft from the continental United States to deliver decisive effects halfway around the world. That's what distinguishes the U.S. Air Force in a lot of ways from other air forces. But what we're talking here is about when that demand for connectivity and reach back becomes a dependency. We've said that a couple of times now. The PLA's recognized how powerful these effects that we can deliver are, leveraging that connectivity, and that's why attacking it is a central component of their strategy. So I guess to get to your question, Lucky, we need to be able to go into the battle space silently but not blind.
Mm-hmm.
We need to have, as we were talking about before, large volumes of information being broadcast into the battle space, but then leveraging some of these advanced capabilities that we're finding on our fifth generation aircraft, rather, that are going to be built into our next generation aircraft that are able to process that large amount of data and really engage in human-machine teaming, so that it's not down to the experience of the 24-year-old fighter pilot who's operating alone and unafraid, but that individual has been trained and is leveraging those advanced data collection and processing capabilities to make decisions without getting that screwdriver collection from 2,000 miles away at the KAOC.
No, that makes a lot of sense. The way that I read your paper, and as we told the listeners, the link will be in the show notes, and it's also going to be on our website, is that, it's not just a single manned aircraft operating with autonomous combat platforms. I mean, we're still talking about human teaming with human machine teaming, right?
We talk about the 24-year-old young pilot that's out there that's piloting the F-47 or the B-21 that's making these real-time decisions. That is a way, AI, if you program it correctly, is a way to kind of reduce some of that risk and still get some of the effects there.
Well, so I'll buy on that, because that is task specific. That's a decision aid that you can train specifically to incorporate commander's intent, assess risk, and do that much more rapidly with the volumes of data that we expect these aircraft to be able to generate in a way that allows the pilot, whether or not they're a seasoned mission commander or patch, or whether or not they're the 24-year-old wingman, to be able to make reliable decisions that we can be risk tolerant with.
So if I'm operating silently on the other side of the front line, I'm operating deep into adversary territory, my mission is go after comms nodes. I'm getting broadcast a whole bunch of data. I'm getting broadcast data from national technical means, satellites overhead, whatnot. All that's being broadcast into my aircraft. And my AI helper is like, help me find the best comm node. Because as a pilot, I'm trying to fly, I'm trying to talk to my CCAs, I'm trying to defend myself, whatever it is. I need somebody to help me sort through all that and find the best comm node. But ultimately, it needs to be the human in the loop that's making the decision. What's the collateral damage? Is it worth the risk? But I don't think we're at the point where, general artificial intelligence is able to understand that intent without very specific.
And that's why I focus on the tasks, right? Because it's not the broader ROE or the broader spins. It's very task specific. So Big, I want to dig more into what will be necessary to be able to enable this kind of disaggregated collaborative air operations. Because like F-22, F-35, B-21, F-47, they're going into bad guy land. They're going to be deep. They're penetrating. They're going to be on the other side where they're generally disconnected from that kind of reach back. What do we need to do, whether or not that's these kinds of AI decision aid tools? Is it training? Do we need to limit the kind of individuals that go on these missions? What do you think is necessary to make this happen? Successful.
There's a lot. You covered a lot of it. Training, authorities, trust. I think that right now there's a lot of hardware and software upgrades that are happening to the F-22, the F-35. We are in the process of figuring out what the systems are going to do on the F-47. The B-21 is designed to be this open system architecture. We've got to be able to figure out how we get those terabytes of data that all those platforms are sucking up that can be analyzed real time through the computer processes that are available on board, so that it is an organic ability to assess all that, while at the same time training your humans in the loop for a little bit different way of battle management, right? So you're no longer just the fighter pilot. You're now the C2. You're also the targeting team back at the AOC. So the perspective that pilot has to bring into the cockpit with them, even if they are augmented with automation and other capabilities to ease that burden, it's a much broader swath of what that individual is actually doing. And they also, so that's the kind of technical piece of it, but there's an authorities and a trust piece that flows down as well, right? We've talked, is it the patch that's going across the line? Is it the young guy that's going across the line? How
would they operate
How
together?
does the human aspect of this that we have over time in 5th gen started to disaggregate, right? We have made decision-making for young wingmen a little bit more autonomous than it used to be for F-15 or F-16 wingmen back in the day. And in the future, that's going to continue to exacerbate. Where and when do we reach the limit of that? And how does the human aspect of flying in a formation push up against this human-machine teaming? Those are all things that have got to be considered that I think are going to be a real challenge as we move forward in this.
Yeah, but again, these are things that I contend we are going to have to grapple with, simply because the type of fight that we enjoyed in Southwest Asia, not that we enjoyed the fight, but the type of fight that we had in Southwest Asia, where
it was uncontested and there was really no jamming.
You didn't have to. The weight of the decision was not on your shoulders as a pilot. Somebody was authorizing you to do what you were doing. Ultimately, I get it. You're responsible, but the CAOC was always in your ear, right? The AWACS was always in your ear. There was always somebody
clearing you hot.
Yeah, like you were talking about on the RC-12. It was like, hey, don't look at that. Look at this. Like, move the ball back, right? Like, there's always somebody there who's got your back, who's looking over your shoulder. And so if we are going to move into this where it's like, no, China's strategy is to disconnect us, and we need to find a different way of operating in that disconnected battle space where we are disconnected by design. How do we train for that? What kind of authorities do we need to give? What type of risk tolerance, what type of risks are we willing to assume? And those are all questions that would have to be answered if we move down the road with something like DCAO and disaggregated collaborative air operations.
And I want to be clear that I have witnessed very senior leaders talk about risk tolerance and talk about ROE and guidelines that are designed to allow the frontline operator, the tactical edge, to accept more tolerance, to accept more risk, rather.
Yeah.
Give them more authority.
I have seen the words happen, but there is, because of the lack of training and because of the kind of the trust that stems from that, not necessarily being built up over time, that it doesn't get internalized. And so it's a cultural thing as well. We can say all we want, but until we actually start internalizing the fact that we trust the young guy to go make these life-altering decisions, that's a big cultural shift.
Yeah,
well, and it sounds very Hollywood, but you can imagine some politician getting briefed by the senior leader and we're leaving the fate of the free world to a 25-year-old pilot who's like 2 years out of flight school. Like,
as we should be.
But you're right. I mean, Big, this is a major cultural shift because we became very risk averse over the last 20 years because it was such a permissive environment, because we had such perfect connectivity, because we had such a specific oversight and reach into the cockpits by the CAOC, that if we're going to move into this next new world, not just of DCAO, but in an environment where we have to accept and anticipate being disconnected by the adversary, that we must be more risk tolerant and provide more authority to our combat operators deep into bad guy land. And that means when we're doing continuation training, when we're doing CT and back here at home, we have to be more tolerant of failure because it's the only way that we become risk tolerant and frankly learn. All right, guys, let's build this future force. We've talked about some of the attributes that we need, like, for example, combat pilots in the future when they're operating with their manned crewed formation, as well as with their collaborative combat platforms. They'll need to be like FAC-As because they will not only need to assign targets, but they'll need to be able to do that real-time weaponeering. We can probably have AI tools, decision aids to help them with target identification and prioritization and things like that. But what are the attributes that we want to see in this future force? People used to deride the F-22 and the F-35 as Cold War relics, but actually it sounds like their architecture might be more foundationally important for the future fight in terms of the organic kill chains, the ability to do all onboard sensing and fuse that information, be able to provide high fidelity situational awareness even when they're disconnected. Those sounds like that's what I want in this future force. So F-47, B-21, CCA are likely headed in a similar way. What do we want this to really look like?
Yeah, well, again, I think when we talk about fifth generation aircraft, when we talk about next generation aircraft, The things that get conveyed to the decision makers, especially the civilian decision makers a lot of time, it's about stealth. It's about low observability. It's about speed. It's about super cruise. It's about weapons loadouts, whatnot. But fundamentally, when we talk about this informationized battle space and the type of strategy that the PLA is pursuing to defeat us, I think we need to look at the onboard capabilities, the onboard information collection and processing capabilities of those aircraft. These are fundamental attributes. They are not just nice to have, like, well, what I need is a car that goes fast, but, an entertainment system would be nice. Right? This is so much more than an entertainment system.
Yeah.
This is what makes the whole thing work. So you look at things like the F-35 technology refresh 3, Block 4, TR3 Block 4, which I talk about in the paper, right? Significant hardware upgrades within the life of the F-35. Block 4 improvements include a new integrated core processor that is 25 times more powerful than its predecessor. It has a larger memory unit.
That is eye-watering.
It has an engine upgrade to provide the necessary cooling and power for all these different capabilities, weapons and electronic warfare capabilities. The Block 4 upgrades are all about the software. They have improvements for target recognition and some of those EW capabilities I was just talking about to support an expanded arsenal of weapons. And things like the B-21 and the F-47 next generation air dominance penetrating counter-air aircraft, rolls off the tongue, NGAD, PCA. Those next generation aircraft are going to bring even more capabilities to the battle space. So even in small numbers, and I know we're going to have small numbers, especially for the next few years, those types of aircraft can really be force multipliers in this information denied environment where we have to push processing and capability to the tactical edge.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a really key point is we can't rely on the processing power back in a data center in Loudoun County, Virginia, to be able to make it to the forward edge of the Taiwan Straits. We need to have that processing. That swap C is a physical attribute that has to be designed in so that we can do that processing real time where we're at.
Yeah, so a couple things on this one. I completely agree that the real-time processing and analysis of the organically generated data is going to be inherently a necessity to really get to this desired operating concept. The cockpit load, if you really just do that, is going to be crazy, which means it's going to be relying on AI or other automation to take advantage of it. So you've got to have the hardware to drive that compute and analysis real time and to drive the AI, which means that you're going to have to be at the cutting edge of these chips. Your processors in these airplanes can't be a decade
Pentium
or 2
56.
decades. Yeah. So there's going to be this recurring requirement to stay at the cutting edge. Yep. You're always going to have to stay at the cutting edge, which is going to drive continuous upgrades. And we see waxes and wanes in whether or not we're willing to upgrade the F-22 or upgrade the F-35, and things get put off because it's not fully ready. Open system architecture technically should enable that to be a little bit more seamless.
Well, I had an industry panel that I honchoed at the Air Warfare Symposium that we had in Denver earlier this year. And the industry guys were all about that. Open systems architecture, it's like they get it. This whole I've got my proprietary thing that's only going to work with my other proprietary things. They have embraced this open systems architecture for the greater good.
But we're doing it in a fiscal reality that doesn't allow us to pay for these upgrades real time. So we've got to find ways to stay at this cutting edge. And that means prioritizing across not only Air Force accounts, other DoD accounts. And ultimately, if we really want to do this and maintain the deterrent effect that this type of capability would provide to the nation, across other government accounts as well.
Well, part of this also is the willingness to be able to procure capabilities that weren't necessarily started in the JSIDS process with requirements, right? So if an industry partner says, I have got this great new upgrade for a capability, we need to have the ability to take that unsolicited proposal and go ahead and procure that, because that's, I think, the way that open system architecture is really going to incentivize industry to invest in themselves. Because if you can organically modernize at your own pace, so if you get a new processor in an aircraft and someone who has a sensor says, ooh, that processor could allow me to do X, Y, or Z, and that's going to deliver more capability. Let them invest in that and then provide that as an unsolicited proposal to the government and be able to say, yeah, That would be really useful and be able to integrate that. And we need to desynchronize the upgrades because of open system architecture to allow that to occur. And that, I think, is what's going to get us on a pace that's really going to accelerate capability.
And I don't want to turn this into a conversation about the broken acquisition system. Okay, it's broken. Let's all just acknowledge it. But, it is, again, we talked about this back to the future moment. We talked about risk tolerance, right? How much risk are you going to tolerate if your 25-year-old pilot is cut off from the CAOC? But we took a lot of risk in the early days of the Cold War. We took a lot of risk in terms of like innovation, and we allowed things to fail, and we had single source contracts for things. And I get it. We've got this acquisition system now that has tried to solve every problem and every conflict that has come up over the last 50 or 60 years, every bad procurement decision, every instance of fraud. I got it. But we're in this fight we're not in a fight, but we're facing down a competition, near peer challenger, if you want to go there. We need to take a little bit more risk if we're going to be able to move it forward, because we can't keep doing things the way we've been doing them. We're not moving fast enough.
So I think if I'm going to wrap this up, it's really about looking at the way we have done business for the last 25 years in terms of how we've disaggregated our capabilities, made them dependent on each other through that battle network, is creating tremendous vulnerabilities that plays into China's strategy to divide and conquer, to degrade and disrupt our networks so they can then pick off the links at will in a way that allows them to collapse our warfighting architecture as a system. And so what distributed collaborative air operations allows us to be able to
Disaggregated. Disaggregated. I know it rolls off the tongue.
I know.
Disaggregated collaborative air operations. I said it to myself in the car about 50 times on the way over here.
So what disaggregated collaborative air operations allows us to do is to be able to be disconnected by design. Be like, all right, you guys want us to be disconnected? We will be disconnected, but as we move forward into the battle space, we still maintain some level of connectivity, but certainly organic kill chain power to be able to be very effective and be more disruptive and responsive to real-time targets, to sensitive targets, to high-value targets that China has, so that we cause them dilemmas. Is that...
Absolutely. And I'll just cap it off by saying geostrategically, if your adversary's strategy is to do this, to disaggregate your force and pick you off with long-range fires, and they think that is going to be effective, and right now,
it would be
among friends, I think it would be. But if that's their strategy, we need a strategy to fight their strategy. And we need to take away the advantages that they have created by eliminating the vulnerabilities that we've created in this exquisite, brittle C4ISR system of systems that we've all come to rely on over the last 30 years.
So I think there are counter arguments to this, that a way of going about correcting this weakness is by generating a self-healing meshed battle network that exists out there, right? That is this notional thing that no matter where the weak links are, we can still kind of piece together and find the right avenue for information to travel. Now, I think that's great. That's a great thing to aspire towards. I don't know how aspirational it is. I know that we can do some of this organic kill chain type stuff right now based on the way that the experience we have with platforms that exist. But in order to have a true, again, geostrategic deterrent effect, I really think you've got to have both.
Sure.
You've got to try and push that network so that it is not as brittle. How do we generate this mesh battle network while at the same time showing and indicating that we don't need it? We can still generate effects without it.
Yeah.
And that's a challenge.
If the adversary pushes the go button and the comms go down and the GPS goes away and the radar doesn't work and the links don't work and the reach back doesn't work, we're still coming, right? And we're coming in places that you cannot possibly imagine. And we may not be coming in force and we may not be coming with mass, but we have built out our force. We have the capacity, and we are going to come for you in the night, and you are not going to see us coming. That's the dilemma that we need to offer the adversary. If they think, well, we'll just cut them off and they'll go stupid and they won't keep coming.
That's the mic drop moment.
There you go.
So I like it. I think there's some discussion to make that a true credible statement, that you've really got to deal with the training and how we get people experienced to be able to go do that. And I think that is to do this, I talked about the self-healing mesh network versus the organic capability. I think both of them together are good. But in order to have the true deterrent effect, or to be able to say, sorry, China, we're coming no matter what, how do we show that we can do that organic
And it comes
thing?
down to the human element. We've got to ensure that our warfighters are trained, experienced, that we've got the right culture, commander's intent, ROE, all of those things. We've given our warfighters, the men and women who are going to go into bad guy land, the tools, the decision aids, and the capabilities they need, and the trust and faith that they need to go do their job.
What does red flag look like using this operational concept, right? When we talk about red flag being your first 5 or 10 combat sorties, that's the opportunity for you to go experience that. What does red flag look like in this?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's worthwhile exploring. All right, gentlemen, thank you so much. It's been a really wide-ranging conversation. Is there any final words you want for our listeners to hear?
Thanks for bringing me on board. This was fun.
Yeah, no, thanks, Big. Thanks for coming, and I've really enjoyed it. Look
Excellent.
forward to getting feedback on the paper.
Yep. All right, folks. Paper's going to be in the show notes. Go to the website, and we'll see you next time. And with that, I'd like to extend a big thank you to our guests for joining in today's conversation. I'd also like to extend a big thank you to you, our listeners, for your continued support and for tuning into today's show. If you like what you heard today, don't forget to hit that like button or follow or subscribe to the Aerospace Advantage. You can also leave a comment to let us know what you think about our show or areas that you would like us to explore further. As always, you can join in on the conversation by following the Mitchell Institute on X, Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn, and you can always find us at mitchellaerospacepower.org. Thanks again for joining us, and have a great aerospace power kind of day. See you next time.